Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how I like to start my seeds indoors, which I like to do in the last month of winter. Now it is not winter here, it is summertime, so stay tuned to the end of the video and I will show you some of the plants that I started in here in the winter and they're growing beautifully in my garden. This year, what I did is use one of these cheap knockoff garden planters to start my seeds inside. Now, I would not recommend using it as an outdoor planter. It would last 5 minutes, but for starting seeds inside, it is absolutely fantastic. So what I like to do is get my heated propagator trays, pop them in here, get some lighting. Now, I'm not using super expensive fancy lighting. They're just some relatively inexpensive LED lights. They're not enough if you're in a dark space, but if you can find a nice sunny area for your system to go, those lights are enough just to give a bit of a kick to your plants and supplement the low light over the winter time. Now, you might be thinking, wow, this is a really big thing you have in your house sitting there. Well, it's actually not that big. I'm just a really tiny human, so it's not going to take up too much space in your house. It's quite convenient, actually. The hardest bit is finding a spot for it to go where you have good natural light coming through the windows. I like to use this top to help me manage the humidity and temperature inside. Now, in my house, I have a fire heating, so it gets quite a bit cooler at nighttime than it is in the daytime, and the fire does cause the house to dry out quite a lot, but we are very humid here where I live in New Zealand, so the humidity never drops below about 50%, so I don't really need to worry about keeping the humidity up. If you're using a sort of heating that really dries your house out, keeping this lid down a lot of the time and adding some pans of water or something like that inside there will help keep the humidity up for your plants to get a good start. But in my situation, in the daytime, have it wide open so that lots of air can exchange in there for my plants, and then in the nighttime, I close it down and I actually throw a big blanket over it to keep the heat inside, and I just do that, open it up again in the morning, and my little seedlings can get up and going. So I've really enjoyed using the system this year. Let's take this lid off now. You don't have to use the lid, but I found it really useful over the winter to have it on. Right, so a thing that I found extremely useful is to have one of these little temperature and humidity readers just sitting inside here so I could see generally what was going on for my little plants. So I would highly recommend popping that in, especially the humidity reading, because you don't want them to dry out too much. I like my plants to sit at around 70% humidity when they're in here. And I mean, different plants have different requirements, but I'm growing so many things at once, I just go for sort of a standard 70%. And usually that is what my house is, and the outside, and everywhere else. So I don't have to worry too much about it. But again, if you live in a drier environment, you might have to work a bit harder to get that humidity up. Now, what I like to do once my seedlings are up and looking pretty good is I like to take them outside, pick them up out of here, take them outside to where I have a little shelf-style greenhouse on my deck to have daytime sunshine. Because like I said, the lights I'm using are not amazing and winter days are short, so I want them to get as much natural sunlight as I can possibly give them. So on nice days that aren't too windy and not too, you know, how winter goes, I take them outside to sit during the daytime and bring them back inside at nighttime. That's also really useful for hardening them off. They're used to already being outside in the daytime, so when it's time for them to stay outside for the nighttime, it's not such a shock to their system. One thing to keep in mind when you get excited and start starting seeds is how much inside sheltered space you have available. Because once those seeds go from the little tray into their next stage, they all of a sudden take up a lot more room. So I always have this issue every year. I just can't control myself. But just keep in mind, if you're starting anything particularly sensitive, in my case that would be peppers, be careful not to start so many that you end up with lots of them outside before they really should be outside. That's how I like to start my seeds inside in the winter. Let's go have a look at the plants I have in my garden. Here I have some dwarf tomato plants. Now, I believe from memory, I have only 2 plants in this bed. It is pretty crazy how happy they are growing here. So these are little dwarf tomatoes, so small bushy ones, which is why I can grow them nice and low like this. And how they got so big and ridiculous is I had these frames, it's a cloche. I had this covered with film so that the frost didn't get on them and they got a bit warmer, and so they got a really, really good start to growing. I actually ran out of room for all my seedlings, and so I put them out quite early. I put them out in the 2nd month of spring here, which is a bit too early for tomatoes. We still have some frosts coming through, but I was like, well, they're going to be outside no matter what, so they may as well go where they're supposed to be, and it's worked out really well. I think they spent some of their sulking time. They didn't like being out in the cold, so they sulked a little bit and didn't do much. But what I think happened while they were sulking about the temperature is I think they put down a really nice root system, because the plants that I put out really early undercover are just insane compared to the plants that I waited and held and put them out at the right time. So that's my theory. And we'll see when I pull these all out at the end of the season if I was right. Having this garden set up with the cloche over the top was really useful, because I also got to put out lots of early spring or sort of winter crops out in the garden. So there's just the last remaining spinach here that's going to seed, and a little bit of Swiss chard that is still in here. The tomato is slowly taking over the whole space, and I just have been pulling this out and feeding it to the chickens as it's getting a little bit old now. I do like to leave crops to seed, so that's why the spinach is hanging out here going to seed. But that is really a great setup. I've really enjoyed having it this way. It's my first year where I've had cloches on my garden beds, and I've really enjoyed that. So I would highly recommend you getting some cloches onto your garden beds too. It lets you get your plants out just that little bit earlier, and it gives them a really good, happy start. So hope you've enjoyed seeing how I start my seeds in the wintertime and how happy they are once we get to the summertime. Thanks for watching.